Right, so good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to yet another Family Business Practice Connect broadcast. Today we've got Derek Cheshire, who's going to talk about innovation without tears. We're going to record the session, have a little chat afterwards, and then we all go off and do our various things. But for the live session on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and YouTube, Derek, if I hit the button for you now, you're happy with that?
I certainly am.
All right, over to you. Off you go.
Right. Well, hopefully it will be innovation without tears, but I really want to talk about the dilemma, the choices people have to make. Is it reinvention or is it innovation? And there's two pictures on the screen. One's what you would expect, and the other one's slightly humorous. Both effectively are selfie sticks. One is an example from India of Jugad, which is their version of bodging, if you like, a phone on a pitchfork. And one is a real selfie stick. Both have been designed in some way. They do exactly the same things, but for different reasons. So we have these choices to make. Now, on the following slides, there will be the information can be used in a number of ways. Either whatever people want to do innovation-wise, the resources and effort they might need to put in, or the resources and effort they've got available and what can they do. It can be used in either of those two ways. So the first thing is, I've talked about this before, the speed of change, but this is really interesting. Over these period, this is the period for which a company, every period, a company will need to change either itself or product. So this is the result of a survey conducted, first of all, in 2018. So who's changing themselves every year or less, and who's doing it every 11 years or more. So as I said, this is 2018. And I'll put the numbers on there. So 8.2% were 11 plus years, and 13.7% were less than a year, and everyone else is in between. Now go forward to 2020 and the pattern shifts very slightly. So 11 plus years, we're down to 1.5%. We're over 16% are now at 1 year or less, but it's that in the middle bit, the 2 to 3 years bit, which is interesting. And that will rapidly expand probably if there are survey results announced for this year. So this is surveys of what companies are actually doing. So, that's my phone. That shouldn't happen. This is what's actually happening, what they're actually doing. So this is a result of the needs of the market, the needs of the company. And there's no reason to suggest that the rest of us won't have to do something similar as well. So these are these are some of the choices that you make or need to make. I mentioned reinvention versus innovation, and reinvention is probably down in the bottom left-hand corner. Innovation is in the top right-hand corner. And the thing that really characterizes them both, and the things you have to get your hands on handle on, is what I call the intensity, which is the amount of resources you need. So this could be money, it could be materials, it could just be time. So do you spend a little bit, a bit more, or an awful lot? Similarly with the scope. Are you working on a subsystem, system, or ecosystem? Now, a subsystem for a motor manufacturer could be redesigning the dashboard of a car. The system could be introducing a new model. The ecosystem could be something bigger. I mean, a bus company, for instance, like Plaxton's, who make coaches and buses in Scarborough now, they make electric buses for TfL. So they're not just looking at buses, they're looking at charging systems and all the stuff that goes around it. So that would be classified as an ecosystem. And the path most people seem to take is straight up the middle. Resources versus scope, that they work on both. But incremental innovation, as I said, is in the bottom left. If you work hard at a small scope, you're creating a niche. If you're putting very little effort in, you're probably relying on technology, and structural innovation is very interesting, where you're doing bits of both. So that's the normal types of innovation that we talk about at the moment. So what about the sort of planning that we actually have to do? Again, if you're down at the incremental level, you're probably doing the normal sort of planning. You've got Gantt charts, you've got plans, you're working with Prince2, you're doing pretty ordinary, boring stuff, but it works down at that level. If you want to move up a little bit, then it's what people term backcasting. It's the work out what the future is and work backwards type of planning. It has been all the rage, and it still is all the rage, but it's not the very, very latest. Now, there is something else which I call story casting, which is, yes, you work out what the future is going to look like, but you don't actually know what it's going to look like. That's why it's more of a story, and then you work backwards from that. So we could be talking about, again, something like Plaxton's, the bus manufacturer. Backcasting could have been how they got to making those electric buses. But what's coming next? What sort of transport systems? What sort of power systems? What sort of charging systems? They're all things they could be talking about in the future and creating a story. But they're not yet. The technology might not actually be there yet. So we're talking about different sorts of planning for different places on that spectrum between reinvention and innovation. Now, what about the sorts of behaviors that we need actually in our organizations? Well, sustaining is pretty much if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. It's safe. That's why it's in red. It's a little bit of a warning. Again, moving up, the disrupting behaviors. That's what happened. I guess most of us will remember the demise of Blockbuster Video and the rise of Netflix. That was due to the disruptive behavior of Netflix and Blockbuster just exhibiting sustaining behavior. They didn't seem to think that there were any challenges, whereas Netflix thought, we see a way forward. So that's disrupting behavior. Now, edge surfing is where things take on a completely different format. Disruptive behavior, people could be organizing themselves in different ways, different routes to market, different attitudes to marketing. Edge surfing, companies will be organized in different ways. They'll probably be flatter, they'll be focused on knowledge. There's more emphasis on real human capital, not the human capital we talked about 10, 15 years ago, but real human capital. How we generate ideas, how we generate new knowledge, how we combine knowledge. All the behaviors will be focused on doing those things because we're storycasting. We are at the edge. So given that we're going to do something, question is, who do we need to persuade and who do we need to take with us? Now, this is, most people will recognize this as the innovation adoption curve. It doesn't matter whether you're manufacturing and selling products to people, or you've got your own people in your organization and you're trying to convince them of what you need to do. It's pretty much the same. So the innovators will be, it's easier to imagine a marketplace where we buy products, but the innovators are the people who they've already signed up for the iPhone 55, even though it's nowhere near the market yet. They absolutely want it. They have to have it. The early adopters, well, they're gonna, next time there is an announcement about a new iPhone, they're going to be queuing at the Apple shop. They want the very latest. The early majority, well, they do want the stuff, but they might just wait for a couple of updates of the operating system or a few reviews in the tech magazines. The late majority, well, they're not quite so fast. When their phone breaks, they will buy an iPhone, but they might buy a second-hand one. And the laggards, well, a Nokia 3310 is good enough for them, so you ain't going to shift them anyway. So, but that sort of behavior exists within a company. There are people who will always follow you, people who will follow you given a reason, and then people who will be dragged along later, and people who just simply won't be dragged along. So the real question is, who do we actually need to persuade? And the answer is just those two. It's not quite 80-20, but the split is interesting. So if we take those people with us, if we convince the keen people and the people who will follow that, then what will happen is the early majority will follow on behind eventually. And then the late majority will follow on behind them. It's a sort of flip-flop effect. And the laggards, well, it's 16%. It's not quite, but it's sort of almost split 80-20 each way. Take on 20% of the people, and a lump will follow, such that at the end you've at least got 80% of the people with you. So there are three things that we need to do without doubt. I like to put things in bite-sized pieces, so cookies will do here. But the three things we need to do: we need to anticipate change, we need to design change, and we need to implement it. And you've got to start from the bottom. You can't implement change without doing either of the other two, or design change without knowing what you're going to do. So, yeah, there is a handy little tool which I've got my website, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But anticipating change. How are we looking at the marketplace? How are we looking at our competitors? Where do we get our information from? Do we talk to the same people, read the same journals, go to the same shows? If so, we're not doing a particularly good job. When we design change, again, how do we design it? Do we do it properly? What do we consider? Who do we involve? When we implement change, do people actually know what they're supposed to be doing? So those people who are on the right-hand side of the curve, have we forgotten them? Have we included stuff they want? Are there people who say, but I didn't know we were changing? So all of those things need to be done. So on my website, the URL coming up in a minute, there is, under resources, there is a online questionnaire which looks at these three sections and gives you a score. It's fun to play with. So if you want to go and play, please feel free to go and have a play. And if you want to ask questions, then you can ask questions. So that's where you can find the questionnaire. Just go to derrickcheshire.com and look under resources, and it's fairly self-explanatory. So I'm open for awkward questions now.
Thanks, Derek. I'll just take the stop share off. Hold on. There you go. We're all back together again. And I've just seen that we are live on all the platforms. So I'll start with a question, actually. Excuse me. And that is, yeah, okay. So I love your diagram about early adopters and how they get the chasm, etc. I've got two questions in one. The first one is, perhaps explain a bit more of your thoughts on the chasm. And also the second thing is, how do you identify those people who are prepared to be in the innovative space?
The chasm is really only put there because of it's almost a historical thing. Anybody who's dealt with change identifies the chasm and talks. I mean, there's a book called Crossing the Chasm. I'm sure Alan knows that one. and people who work in change talk about it, and that's really where the chasm is. That's where the work has to be done, really, to the left hand side of the chasm. You could put it anywhere, but it's definitely on the left hand side of the graph. But how do you identify them? Well, the easy way is to throw the wetted finger or the seaweed in the air, and it'll be fairly obvious. I mean, a bit like the iPhone thing. If you held up something that was, oh, this is a mock-up of the latest iPhone, the early adopters will be, you'd be underneath a pile of people. They would be keen to have it. But similarly, I mean, when you talk about things like we're going to, I don't know, reorganize the company, create a new division because this is what we're going to do, and people automatically say, what about my job? What training are we going to have? Well, there to the right hand side, the innovators and the early adopters will be, that's great, I'm in, and they'll ask the questions later, and that's really the main difference. And the resistance increases the more to the right you go. The late majority will go with you, but only after they've seen that it's not detrimental to them. It's slightly easier with customers because they get products or they don't. But with people, you have to do they're a bit more cynical in the current climate, and quite rightly so, really.
I don't know about this current climate. I think it's always been that way.
People have always been cynical when you talk about change, restructuring. What about my job? Do I get a pay rise for doing this? So yeah.
It's interesting, actually, Derek. If I go back 30 odd years when we launched a major company and all went with it, which was totally innovative at the time, and when I finally left that and decided to do my own thing, I was surprised at the number of people who said to me, "Let me know what you're doing because I'd be interested." These are employees, and it's because they've gone through a project where they could see that innovation had worked and produced something very clever, and they wanted to be on the next one. And they were exactly as you said, which was they were up for change. Whatever something new would be, they were up for it. Whereas a whole pile of others just kind of went along because they believed it once they could see it, not the other way around.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. You can do something very innovative in a company, and a lot of people won't go with you, but you could leave that company and they'll say, let me know next time. They've seen it in action. Now they want it, or now they're prepared to do it. Yeah. And it's quite interesting because at the moment I'm assessing applications for the Queen's Award for Innovation, and not all, but a lot of the ones that we recommend or who are likely to be recommended are ones who have changed themselves in some way, or they have changed during the process of creating a product or service. Companies who say, oh, I'm being innovative and we got a clever new product, generally speaking, they have their applications poor, even though they've got a very clever product, because they can't repeat it. They haven't got a process or a culture or a set of behaviors that will create further products.
Isn't that about the way that businesses, the culture in a business and the business structure evolves? Because most new products come usually from and most innovative new products come from fairly new businesses. So they're kind of creating a structure as they go. And usually it's quite chaotic to begin with.
But there is a problem there, though, because I suppose I've semi-identified a niche, but not fully identified it. A lot of startup companies who've gone through, they've been spawned out of sort of incubators and universities and things. They've got all this great stuff, but once they formed a company, they settle into the old ways, a lot of them.
But that's my point, is that most when a business is set up and they form a company of people, they go into they create a setup that works for them at that point. To challenge that is very disruptive. Your point was very well made, I think, by that change, the bell graph. That's 16% either side of the people who lag behind and the people who are the innovators, the entrepreneurs, and the early adopters. Those are really people who want to create new things all the time. The body of where we sit generally in companies sits in that early adopter and late adopter area, I think. And that's where those companies end up. Even with, I mean, I've worked in large corporations where they've brought in young companies who have great ideas, great technology, and they're coming in with some really good work, but they don't speak the same language. And to me, it's very much about communication and change and going across that curve and getting people to come along it. It's very much about communication.
In fact, one of the things you can do actually, if you're setting up something that's truly innovative, is just define your own language.
Yeah.
I mean, I was at a seminar a long time ago now. I don't know if anybody's been to Dublin and been to the Guinness Storehouse.
I'm there next week.
Yeah, well, that place it was an old Guinness brewery, and it was completely derelict for a long time. And a guy called Ralph Ardill from I think it's called the Design Consultancy came up, pitched this idea to Guinness to make it a sort of effectively a visitor attraction. And they bought into the idea, but they got people from everywhere, sales, marketing, operation, and they didn't speak the same language. So they actually defined their own language, and then they knew what they were talking about. And yes, it's a bit extreme, but communication is key. But if you can define your own language, what's a plan, for instance, it's very different things to different people. But yeah, the Guinness Storehouse is actually a true innovation. So go and enjoy, Peter.
I will do. Yes, I'm at a conference at Croke Park for the week with the family.
Yes. I know. I'm not going. So
yes, I know you're not. But at the same time, whilst the family are running there, I fully intend to go to a couple of places, and that was one of them.
Anyway, that is a true innovation. It's a sample the innovative product and atmosphere.
Yeah, I think I'll try.
Good.
How about you, Alan? Hang on, you're on silent.
You're on mute, Alan.
Press the button. Good man, you're there.
I'm there, yes. It pressed the button with what you were just saying about culture, Derek. Press the button with me on, if I can use that word, press the button in terms of the eco cycle, the organisation eco cycle. The four elements in the eco cycle are in the sweet zone in between poverty and crisis or rigidity. Of the four elements of leadership, management, and power, one of the elements is culture, and culture, according to David Hurst, changes incredibly slowly. And so if you're going to try and do innovation, it seems to me the daftest thing you can do is not to have an area where that the innovation can grow in its own right, because I think the corporate culture will kill it stone dead.
Alan, it's a really good point. If I might just interject, the business that we put together, we put together our own mini group inside an organisation of 1,400 in the UK alone, and 4,000 worldwide. And it was only because we did that and we had to jump through some ridiculous hoops. It was the only way we could create what we wanted, because as soon as we went out into the big organization, they just stopped everything dead. So we created effectively an innovation hub, and it created a 38 million turnover business in 2 years, and 75 million in 5, but only because of that. And I have to tell you, because of politics, there are an awful lot of people outside of that hub who are quite happy to see it fail. And because of cultural change. And the same thing happens with family businesses. Quite often a business is family orientated, it's built, it gets larger, and they sell the business. A corporate comes along and says, I'll buy you, you're useful, and they do. And then they try to integrate the culture, and it's just chalk and cheese. It's always going to be chalk and cheese.
It's those companies, when they take over another company, allow it to contain its own culture.
Yeah,
It starts to mean you get more out of that acquisition.
yeah.
Something interesting that all three of you were saying earlier on, I think, was about the way that driving change within a business is difficult because of the culture. And cultures do. I mean, my experience of culture change over 35 years or so, 40 years, it does change slowly, but that sometimes you find that by using innovation and change, it drives the culture change, and you get that culture change. You do lose some people along the way, but in essence, the only way to make a business culture move more smoothly and more quickly is through applying change in a very structured way. And going back to that point I made earlier, that's really about communication as well, internal communication to all those people who can then make the decision, I like this, I don't like this, I'm going to go work somewhere else. No, I'm going to stay here. This is exciting. I want to be part of it. And you start to see that in the larger business, the larger corporations that I've worked with, where they start to realize that they are losing really valuable intellectual property that are in people's minds, that in their brains, and those people leave and then they lose it all, and the expertise that so many large companies don't record, and they leave it in a person's mind, and so bringing those people on, they've started to really engage with a lot of their team to make sure that they do enthuse them, do bring them along, do excite them in those areas. It's quite interesting the way that that's changing. Where I don't think that's happening is in smaller and medium-sized businesses and the smaller, larger corporations.
Because you need creative leadership to enable that to happen. And if you haven't got creative leadership who can just something Derek was saying made me think is telling a story about what could be happening in the right way will engage with those ones who you want to get engaged with. But if you've got the classic classic leadership of the giant corporations, that they are absolutely not going to change in a big way. And Hearst said that what's his name? General Motors. There were 40 years in decline, and it was only in the actual crisis of the 2008-9 financial crisis they actually forced them to do something, which was divesting all sorts of things and trying to be different. But whether they succeeded or not, I don't know. But it's
arguably definitely not. I think Ford are in the same position as well in many ways. I know it's heresy that you can't possibly say that Ford isn't, but it is. The motor industry has changed beyond all recognition in the last 20 years, and whilst you can be innovative with product itself, the culture has to be innovative, and if it's not, you're not going to get anywhere. All you're going to do is tickle around the edges, and you see that unfortunately so often. I was lucky enough to be at the Innovation Awards last Friday, plug because we got a special commendation, which was lovely. I've got to get it in somewhere, and Obviously, it's full of people, that are interested in innovation. That's the whole point. And you could see, the buzz in the room. And the reason wasn't just because of the usual award buzz, it's because they're innovators. A lot of those businesses are either innovators or organizations that serve innovators and get it. Exactly what you've been talking about, Derek. Derek, I'm mindful of time. I try and hold these to around 30 minutes or so. And believing that we've already hit that. We can carry on talking about it afterwards, but for the live broadcast, is there one last point you'd like to make about innovation?
I would just say that it applies to it. Well, despite some of the things we've just talked about, it does apply to companies of all sizes, but with the caveats that yes, big companies might not have the right culture or the right management, but it can be done. If we'd had a little more time, I'd have briefly skipped over a case study that was one of the first projects I ever did. But
go on then. You've got
okay.
Can you do it in 5 minutes?
I can.
Right.
It was a mattress manufacturer in Mexico. The thing that was very slightly different about them is that they were a privately owned company, not a family-owned company, but they were a privately owned company, not quoted, turned over about 110, 120 million a year, making mattresses. Largest supplier of mattresses to Central and Southern America, and second largest for the Southern US. And they saw that recession was coming. They had two factories. They actually did have 3 factories. They had 800 employees, and they thought, crikey, we're gonna hit a brick wall here, because mattresses in South America, they're not just like Benson's for beds. They are luxury products. It's like buying a very expensive sofa for them. So when recession comes, your sales go off a cliff. So they just literally said, we want some innovation. We don't know what it means, but we want some innovation. So what we actually did was we created the Casa de las Ideas, the House of Ideas. Took, I think it was about a dozen, maybe slightly more people from finance, marketing, operations, sales, everywhere. Put them in a big house. The house next to live for 6 months. The house next door was where they worked for 6 months. And their brief initially was design 5 new products. And they were simple things, because these were incremental. They were just the silly things like they made their own springs. So go to people like 3M and DuPont to get plastic springs, which meant that they could go into hospitality and healthcare, and a number of other things, which they did. But then after that, they took on board 2 designers and started and realized that they knew about beds and people's bodies. These designers knew about design, put the 2 together and start making sort of Mary Quant style furniture, which worked a treat. So at the end of 2 years, they'd got a new company, new product lines. But what they then did after that was it was seen within the company as almost as a pat on the head if you were asked to go to the House of Ideas. So rather than people work there all the time, it wasn't an R&D place. It was a place where they cycled through. So people went back out into the offices, back out into the factory after being there. And then more people wanted to go through it. So gradually what they were doing was changing the culture of the company. It's a bit like a heart bypass machine or kidney stuff, whatever, dialysis, changing the culture slowly but continuously, and it worked. It absolutely worked a treat. So, which is slightly better than WH Smith had something similar, but they had innovation hothouse bolted onto the side. Of course, it was almost like just like 2 businesses with a walk-through door. That was all it was. But it can be done with bigger companies. So anyway,
just to pick up on that as an interesting point, how they then put people back into the business who then had far more innovative thoughts. So the culture was changing all the way through.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
You just have to have somebody at the top who's willing to. I mean, it didn't cost a lot of money. The whole thing, we reckon, for that first 6 months, probably cost them about £100,000.
Wow.
And at the end of 2 years, they still had 3 factories because they were looking to close one, and they had 1,200 instead of 800 employees.
Wow.
So they had actually expanded.
Mm.
And the workforce was actively supporting it. Even the ones who may not have wanted to go to the House of Ideas thought it was a good idea.
Interesting. Derek, I'm mindful of time, so
Indeed.
we can carry this conversation on afterwards. But as far as the broadcast is concerned,
if people aren't here, they should have been, shouldn't they?
Yeah, they should have been, definitely. Thanks for that. Really appreciate it. We are now within the Family Business Practice are going to continue to have this conversation for the next probably half an hour or so, something like that. But for those of you that are watching this right now, obviously, Derek, your details are up beforehand. Obviously, they're inside the social media process as well. Get in touch with Derek, get in touch with us regarding the Family Business Practice. And that's been another Family Business Practice Thursday session. So thanks very much indeed.